Story 1. I do not believe in ghosts, the paranormal, or anything of the sort. Here's my story. I was camping at a lake. Took an afternoon hike around the area with my nephew. I go off trail quite often and do so towards the lake. I came across a crevice in the rocks and went into the area by taking off my backpack and squeezing through. The area was ringed entirely with boulders and the crevice was the only way in. There were logs arranged around the fire pit in the middle. There was a structure, a primitive outhouse, had to have been built in place and hand-carried in piece by piece. Inside the outhouse was a bucket with a child's cartoony potty on top, like you'd use for potty training. Sticks were hung all over, tied into figures a la the Blair Witch. Stones stacked in little piles. The area was a good 20 yards off the trail. It had this overwhelming sense of dread. My nephew, 13 at the time, was also weirdly terrified and felt uneasy. We left and immediately heard voices. In remote areas, there had been no other people around. Instead of heading back towards the voices and the trail, we cut back towards the lake and decided to head back to camp along the lake instead of the trail. As soon as we did, we heard footsteps through the brush and spooked and ran to the lake's edge. There were more stacked stones and stick people, so we bolted again. Eventually, we decided we'd scared ourselves and laughed. When we came across a large rock outcropping, we cut back into the forest. As soon as we get about 5 feet into the forest, the unsettling feeling returns. By now, we were very far off the trail and there were no people on the shore. Very distinctly, I hear a small child laughing in the woods. My nephew, not easily scared, grabbed my arm and started to run. I heard more voices as we sprinted to the shore. As soon as we hit the lake edge and clear the forest, the hairs on the back of my neck went down, and it felt instantly warmer. We didn't go back into the woods and kept hearing footsteps following us. When we got near the camp, we were both sweating and terrified and sprinted the last few hundred feet because we had to go through the forest. There was nobody around. We both heard it. We refused to go back to the area to prove there were sticks bound together or the hidden clearing with the rocks and figures in the woods. The rest of the people laughed, but we heard the laughter and footsteps and never saw anyone. I don't believe in anything paranormal, but someone or something followed us through the woods that day, and I never saw another soul the whole way back or while on that trail. When my sister suggested that campground again, I refused. Story 2. I was 16 or so, and my BF at the time was an avid hiker, hunter, and all-around outdoorsman. I was also into all these things and loved camping. We decided to drive up to a spot that picked up the Appalachian Trail, an area we'd been hiking for years, and camp for the night. The sun was starting to set, and we were settled in and snuggling by the campfire. All of a sudden, this sense of darkness, dread, and fear washed over me, and I was completely anxious when just moments before everything was peaceful. I was genuinely scared, and had no idea why. I was laying there, trying to ignore the feeling, when all of a sudden my BF goes, "So are you also feeling super freaked out right now, or is it just me?" "Yeah, I am." "Right, let's get the fuck out of here." We packed our things as fast as we could and rushed the F out of those woods, desperately trying to reach the car before the last bit of light disappeared. I remember jogging down the trail through the woods, staring up at the twilight sky, peeking through the branches and hoping we'd make it, while not hearing a single sound throughout the woods. No birds, no insects, only us. Everything felt so heavy. We got to the car just as it fell dark, scrambled in, and drove out of there as fast as we could. The next day I was at home watching the evening news when they broke that a missing college student's body had been found in the woods near a section of the Appalachian Trail. Authorities suspected foul play and had been searching for him for about a week or so. They confirmed that he had been murdered, and his body dumped there by his suspected classmates. My stomach dropped, and my blood ran cold because they showed footage of where he was found, which was right next to where we had set up camp the night before. My BF also saw the story and called me to see if I'd seen it. Needless to say, we were both totally freaked out. I have no idea what that feeling was in the woods, but the most unsettling part for me was that my BF felt it too at the exact same moment as me, even though I didn't say anything. And my head was lying on his chest so he couldn't see my face or expression. Super weird. Story 3. I got lost in the Quever River State Park in Missouri overnight, wearing nothing but a swimsuit. It was summer and we'd been tubing in the river all day, drinking a bit. My friend and I didn't realize it was getting late. We got lost on our way back to the car, and once the sun had set, there was literally no light. The trees blocked out the moon and the stars. No light, no shadows. Like an empty vacuum. No sounds. It's like everything turned off after the sun went down. You had to feel your way through the forest. Might as well have gone blind. The alcohol had skewed my internal compass, but the fear of being stuck in the forest sobered me up, and I felt like I had to at least try to find my way back. When the sun sets, the forest drops about 20 degrees or so in temperature, so not only could we not see, but we were freezing. At one point we got separated. I fell in the brush, broke my flip-flops, and sprained my ankle so I could barely move anywhere. Honestly, I started questioning if I was going to make it out of those woods. We eventually found each other by following each other's voices and decided it would be best to just stay put until the sun rises. She fell asleep. I don't know how, because all I could think was that something was going to eat me. Out of the pitch black, about 100 yards from us, stood 3 iridescent blue figures. They looked like people, but really, really skinny. Their light was very dim, like a really low-frequency UV light. It was the first sign of light or shadow I'd seen since the sun had set. At first I just thought I was losing my mind, but I closed my eyes and opened them and they were still there. They moved around a little bit like they were communicating with each other or something, but never got any closer to me. They just stood there watching me. The only way to describe them was that their movements were very wispy. In that forest, I was more terrified than I'd ever been in my life, but when I saw them, I suddenly felt safe. I feel like I should have been afraid of whatever it was, but I was so traumatized from everything that they brought me, a strange kind of peace. It felt like they were looking out for me and that everything was going to be okay. I'll never forget that. When morning came, someone had sent out a search party, and eventually, we were found. Over a mile away from my car. Somehow we'd been turned in the opposite direction of my car and were so deep in the brush, it took a 15-minute hike on a sprained ankle, and 20 minutes on a four-wheeler just to reach civilization. There was an EMT and our freaked-out parents waiting for us. This was in 2011. Still have no clue what it was that I saw. Was told a girl died in the park only a couple of weeks before under the same circumstances. I'm glad we made it out alive. Story 4. Years ago, while I was a senior in high school, my friends and I decided we would go camping in the woods behind his house. The woods behind his house were attached to state land, and there wasn't anything in them for quite a long way. The 3 of us got a big tent from Walmart and filled our backups up with camping supplies, food, and a ton of weed and beer. We hiked for a good 10 miles probably, until we found a clearing and some trees near a field. The spot was awesome, so we set up camp and started smoking and drinking. Night came and we had an awesome fire going, food cooking, and we were smoking a blunt each and bullshitting. We decided to go back into the tent and hotbox it. We were in there for probably a good 15 minutes when all of a sudden, our massive fire just went straight out. I, curious, went outside to check and was freaked out. This fire was out. I mean fucking straight out. No embers burning. I shook it off and just thought I was stoned out of my mind or something. Friends and I relit the fire with new wood and kindling and went back into the tent. The fire was bright and I could see it was burning tall. There was no wind. About 5 minutes and boom, the fire is out again. This time I hear some crunching in the leaves. My friend grabs my arm and whispers he has a pocket knife and is ready to run out there. I told him to shut the fuck up and wait and listen. Crunching slowly faded off into the woods. Eventually we all went out and noticed no fire and no burning embers, but no water was poured on it or anything. It was not windy and it was about 60 F outside. I lit fires many times in my life while camping and never experienced this. I relit it one last time and went back into the camp. This time I kept the door flap open and the screen closed to watch it. It was burning tall as hell and looked like it would last a while. All of a sudden it went out right in front of us, completely out. It was as if it just poofed into nothing. We all heard crunching in the woods again, like something was walking away from our tent, stopping and then walking away more. This crunching occurred for a good 15 minutes. Safe to say we closed the tent up and all went back to have a full view with a single pocket knife at our defense. I was scared out of my mind. We stayed awake until sunlight and none of us slept. We made it back and still bullshit about it from time to time. Story 5. My husband and I used to go camping on Silver Strand State Beach outside San Diego. One night my husband was being particularly annoying, so at maybe 2 a.m., I went for a walk by myself on the beach since I didn't want to be near him in a tent. So I'm walking along and I hear this grunting and growling, but I couldn't see anything. Then it was like moaning. I figured it was a dog, but decided that I better head back to the paved area where our tent was. This isn't a joke and God's honest truth. Out of nowhere, I was surrounded, not threateningly, but they were just there, by guys in military uniforms with guns. I really freaked out, and my overactive imagination was like, oh my God. They are chasing a monster or a moaning alien and I'm in the middle of the shooting zone. I literally screamed like I was in a horror movie and tried to run back to the camp area, tripped on a pile of sand and fell on my face. One of the military guys stood over me and was saying, ma'am, and helped me up. I tried to get away from him and run back and he didn't stop me, so in my head I thought, make it to the car, grab husband, make it to the car, grab husband, figure it out after. So, as I was running along, a truck pulled up in front of me, and I was like, oh my God, these are like the men in black and they are gonna throw me in the back of that truck and take me to a facility or something. Two guys in like baseball hats and blue sweats hopped out, and my husband must have heard me scream because he appeared at the edge of the beach and parking area. I screamed at him, stay there, or something totally ridiculous because I was thinking something crazy like, save yourself, my love, I'm done for, save yourself. If it isn't obvious, I'm a little dramatic and I'm not good under pressure. So when my husband came jogging over to where the truck was, I was expecting that he was going to be shot, and I started crying. One of the guys in blue sweats walked over to me, just as my husband met up with me and said something like, hey, I'm Sergeant Gonzalez. I'm with the SEAL training program up the road. Very sorry we scared you. We're just not used to people being out this late. I looked at him and said, you guys are training SEALs with guns? Both he and my husband laughed and he said, no, I'm sorry, Navy SEALs, soldiers. Our school is in Coronado and we were teaching these guys how to patrol at night. You scared my guys as much as we scared you. I asked about the growling. They said that either I or they had probably spooked a sea lion and that if I was alone, I really needed a flashlight. It turns out that the Coronado area base where they train all the Navy SEALs is just a few miles up the road from Silver Strand. And those guys spent hours at a time just walking up the beach. I just happened to get in the middle of them. They apologized for scaring me and went on their way. My very nice husband laughed at me for the next hour or so, and to this day, if we see a sea lion or seal on TV or at the zoo, he'll do his best impression of me and say, you guys are training SEALs? With gun-uns. Story 6. When I was little, I lived with my grandparents on a small farm with nice woods behind them. I played in those woods from the time I was a toddler. Someone had let out their big old meat rabbits, or maybe they escaped, and they'd come to the property. Being a toddler, they stood about as tall as me. This was the 90s, and one of the movies I watched was Alice in Wonderland. I remember thinking, if Alice followed the big white rabbit into the woods, so should I. These were friendly big rabbits. I think I have pictures somewhere. They would sit and cuddle and get scratched while I fed them horse grain. Off I went, following them. I was hesitant, but I loved those rabbits, so I kept following. We got to the edge of the sort of cleared woods I was allowed to play in, near our swampy ponds. I trailblazed into the woods, mostly walking through the shallow stream because I was too little to be able to stomp down bushes. The rabbits would stop and turn around to watch me follow. We finally got to a clearing, in the middle of a heavily wooded forest. There was a tree that had been struck by lightning, and the way it fell, and the bark that stayed made it look like a throne. I would stay down there and play while the rabbits played with me or just did rabbit stuff. I'd bring my toys down. I'd just hang out with them. Well, this went on for 3 or so years until I was 6 or 7. I'm assuming the rabbits passed away. My grandpa said one got hit by a car. Without the rabbits, I didn't go down in the woods anymore. And I honestly didn't think about it until someone reminded me about them years later when I was 12. I decided I would go back down for old time's sake and just go into the woods to sit and think. It took me forever to get down there since my paths had overgrown. But sure enough, my stump throne was there, and some old toy cars were at the base still. I was stoked to find that and sat down in my old spot. I can't remember why, but I decided it was time to go back up. I brought my little Hot Wheels to put them with the rest of my collection and was spinning the wheels as I walked back up and out of the woods. When I got inside, I was getting yelled at for disappearing. I thought I was just down there for 20-25 minutes. But when I looked out the window, it was pitch black out. I had gone down in the early afternoon. When I was little, I could always hear when I was being called, yelling for me, whistling, shooting over the hill, banging the cast iron together, etc. My dad and grandparents had been calling and searching for me everywhere for hours. They called all the neighbors to start a search party. And my mom pulled up as they were yelling at me, trying to figure out where I was, and she was in tears and pretty much collapsed, hugging and squeezing me to death. I don't know what happened. It was like I was in a bubble that sounds, time, or lack of, light couldn't penetrate. Story 7. I just got back from a backpacking trip in Pennsylvania, backpacking on the Appalachian Trail, with a group. My parents picked me up and we made it a road trip. We wanted to see New York City and all the touristy stuff there, but we were trailing a pop-up trailer, so we weren't going to risk parking or pay for a hotel. So my dad found a camping site nearby. Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn. You can camp there. And we did. We got in late, around 1 a.m. It was very dark, and there was no one on site to show us our camping spot. We got our number from a bulletin board posted at the entrance and drove around on runways in the dark for about 40 minutes. We had no idea where we were going, and it was impossible to find our way in total darkness. We finally found 2 cop cars on the runway. My dad drove by them and rolled down his window. No one was in there. The 2 cop cars were facing each other, about 20 yards apart, their lights on and flashing each other. But no one was there. We finally find our spot, and it's right in front of an abandoned hangar with lights on, and next to an old ambulance car. We figure, hey, it's abandoned, and start unloading. Then a guy comes out with a shotgun. The ambulance isn't abandoned, it's a remodeled RV. We chat for a bit, tell him this place is creepy as hell, and he's like, yeah, it is. That's why I have a shotgun. Anyway, we get unloaded and I'm dead tired, so I immediately fall asleep. When I wake up in the morning, my mom asks us if we heard noises in the night. I slept like a rock, but apparently my mom couldn't sleep all night because she kept hearing a clanging noise from the hangar. Later on, I saw a forklift and a compact excavator come out of the hangar. I figured that was the noise my mom heard in the night. I tell my parents, and my dad talks to our neighbor. Our neighbor had been staying at Floyd Bennett Field for a few days and said he never heard any noise or machinery come from the hangar, because the hangar was abandoned. He left later that day. That night I left my window unzipped to get some air in. I have no idea if I was sleeping or this actually happened, but in the middle of the night, I saw a glowing white light flicker on and off in the hangar. I honestly think I was half dreaming, but nonetheless, it was creepy. The next day, my mom was brushing her teeth early in the morning outside when she claimed she saw a man in a white hazmat suit come out of the hangar with a briefcase. My mom freaks out, and finally, my dad drops some info on us. Floyd Bennett Field has a long history, but one creepy tidbit is this. During the 21st century, Floyd Bennett Field has been used for dealing with the aftermath of disasters. After the crash of American Airlines Flight 587 into Bell Harbor in the nearby Rockaway Peninsula on November 12, 2001, one of Bennett Field's hangars was used as a makeshift morgue for the crash victims. The noises at night, the lights in the hangar, the machinery, and a guy coming out in a hazmat suit, plus it previously being a morgue, were enough to get us out of there. We were supposed to stay 3 nights and ended up spending only 2 nights there. Even my dad, who didn't believe what my mom and I were saying, didn't want to stay there. While we stayed there, we never saw anyone around or even in our section except our neighbor in a remodeled ambulance. We saw a few tents here and there, but not actual campers, even at night. During the day, people would fly drones and such on the runway, but left after a few hours. All in all, it was creepy. Story 8. Summer of 2016, 16 years young. Hiking with my father and family friend, Steve. We are in the Colorado Uncompahgre Wilderness, hiking up Wetterhorn Peak, a full-day trip, roughly 15 miles round trip. I'm jamming to my downloaded playlist during most of the time on my hikes while we are at the ridgeline about to make the final ascent to the peak. The terrain started to get too technical for my dad, and he didn't want me going on without him. So we waited to overlook the Theft Valley that the mountain turned into. I'm listening to my music and I think I hear something, but disregard it as part of a track that just went unnoticed to that point. A moment passes and I hear the noise again. It sounds like someone hollering, but I can't really tell for sure. I mean, if it was someone shouting, I figured that my dad would hear. I decided to take off my headphones just to be safe, and another moment passed. Help me, I'm stuck. I hear it clear as day. I tell my dad that I hear someone shouting for help, and we shout into the mouth of the valley, trying to communicate with this guy shouting for help who we couldn't even see. I am able to get him to hear me, and we start shouting to each other across the mountain range. I yelled out and asked if he was all right. His response confused me. Call 911. I'm fine, I'm stuck. So we assumed that it was a hiker who had taken the wrong path and needed help getting back. I started to ascend the peak to intercept Steve as he descended to ask if he had any cell signal at the top. Once I reached him, I filled him in on the situation and found that there was no service at the peak. As frantically walk back to my dad with my phone out, in 1 square foot of land I stop and my phone switches from no signal to showing 0 bars, minimal signal. I'm able to get into contact with 911 and fill them in on the situation. I then went to Steve and my dad, who had seemed to spot the hiker on the lower face of the mountain. My dad told me to start trekking to the car, and once he and Steve reached the hiker, he would give me a signal whether or not to drive the truck into town for help. The hiker was a young man in his mid-20s. All he had on him was a t-shirt and shorts, no day pack or water, to my knowledge. He had fallen the day before and took quite the tumble. He had been slipping in and out of consciousness for the past 24 hours, which he had thought were 2-3 days. He had both ankles broken, a broken arm, and a broken neck. When the hiker was yelling, "I'm fine," he was actually saying, "I'm blind," due to a large gash above his eyes, causing both of them to be swollen shut. Luckily, 2 helicopters arrived within an hour or 2. One was a standard Medevan chopper, and another one was a military helicopter that was equipped with more versatile landing gear. Even luckier was that the only 2 hikers behind us that day were a couple, an EMT and a firefighter. My dad, Steve, and the couple worked together to properly position the hiker and communicate with the medevac chopper. They were able to fly him to Durango to receive emergency treatment. The hiker, Dave, ended up making a full recovery and summiting the mountain the next year. A lot of luck went into this. It may be one of the only experiences that makes me question if there is a higher power. Receiving a cell signal in the middle of nowhere and contacts 911. Hearing Dave over my music when he was blindly yelling for his life. An EMT and firefighter couple hiking behind us. So fun side note. I received a message from the emergency response 911 because they attempted to call me once I left the square foot of signal. I guess the line was still open because I could hear the conversation going down in the planning room. They were discussing whether or not to send a bird out there because the call from me could be a hoax, and the Weather was picking up to the point they questioned if they could even send out a helicopter.
The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.